So yeah, I am the youngest of five siblings. And when I say the youngest, I mean the youngest. My brothers and sisters are between 15 and 20 years older than me. It's unusual, but we're all close. And, even maybe even more so after losing both our parents back in the 90s. So by the time, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, that the pressure of living a life in contradiction of my true gender became too much for me to bear, I was genuinely worried about how to tell my older siblings that their young to them brother was about to become their equally not that young sister. Who to tell first? Will I tell the others before I get to do it? Will the person who finds out last feel snubbed? Will they indeed even want to know the new me? I hoped, of course, but in these sort of circumstances, you just don't know. And I know too many trans people who have been wholly or partly ostracized by their families to take anything for granted. I decided that I couldn't cope with telling them all at once. It would just be too much for me, particularly if it didn't go well. And so I decided that I had to tell them individually. I also decided that I had to come out to them in person, and I had to come out to them very close together. So 4 years ago, to within almost a week, I embarked on a 2-day outing, pardon the pun, to visit them all in their homes and come out to them all in person. So the first to be told was on a Saturday afternoon, was sister number two. She is the next youngest after me. She lives the furthest away in County Kildare, and so I drove down there on a Saturday morning with an ever-rising sense of panic. I arrived to find her in an empty house, with my brother-in-law having diplomatically had to go and do something important right when I was due to arrive. My sister brought me into the kitchen to make a cup of tea before we get down to the serious business. "You've had us all worried," she said. "We have been imagining all sorts. I even had a dream last night that you were going to tell me that you like dressing up in women's clothes." Seriously, as icebreakers go, not the best choice at that moment. "Well," I said, "you might not have been that wide of the mark." "What? You're not wearing women's clothes, are you?" "Oh, no, not right now." "Okay, well, let's go into the living room and you can tell me all about it." So in we went with our cups of tea. I sat on the settee and put my tea down, and I started describing how I'd had this issue that I lived with pretty much all my life, and I can't keep a lid on it anymore. And at this point, my sister had moved to the settee next to me because she could see I was struggling. She put her arm round me and hugged me as I said the words beyond which there could be no return. "I'm transgender." I don't even remember what she said next. I just know it was all okay. We discussed my embryonic transition plans. The fact that my kids already knew and were good, that's another story. I showed her a few photos of the new me that I had on my phone. "Well," she said, "you look a lot better than you did in my dream last night." She even asked if I could send her the photos so her grown-up kids could see their Auntie Kirsty. At this point, my brother-in-law returned. "Well, what's the news?" "Well, Bob," that my name wasn't Bob, "Bob's going to be changing quite a bit, and he's going to become Kirsty, and she'll be my sister." And his reaction was instant. "Fantastic! That's great news. Congratulations." He was brilliant, completely relieved the tension. So after a bit more chat, more hugs, a few more tears, it was time for me to depart. One down, three to go. Next up, brother number one, the eldest, up the road in County Meath. I arrived there about 45 minutes later to find that just as with my first visit, his partner had decided that she also had something pressing to do just as I was due to call. So I went through the same preamble with my brother, and then I dropped that line again. "I'm transgender." He initially seemed dumbstruck. At first, I thought he was staring off into the middle distance, but then I realised that when I had arrived, he'd only just put Sky Sports on mute, not switched it off, so he might just have been trying to lip read Jeff Stelling at the time. He was as accepting as he possibly could be, and he didn't say anything negative, but it was clearly a shock. Of course it was. But he said that whatever I had to go through, he would be there for me. And again, just like last time round, his partner decided to make her return at this point. She didn't come straight in, but she went into the kitchen and he went in after her. I heard some muffled conversation of transgender, and they both came back into the room. She hugged me. When I began to explain it all again for her benefit, my brother was now interjecting to assist me, like he was processing it all in real time as he explained it to her. Everything became so much more positive and upbeat. I told him about our sister's dream and asked if he'd had any inkling. Well, they had both thought that I might be gay. Well, I am, but not like they thought. And because, in an attempt to stop them worrying in advance of the trip, I had said that nobody had any fatal illnesses, they'd wondered if I might have a non fatal but nevertheless debilitating illness. So much for allaying their fears. As I was leaving, my brother hugged me on his doorstep and he said, "Whatever happens, you'll always be my wee brother. My wee sister. You'll always be my flesh and blood." I drove back up north with a mixture of relief, satisfaction, and gratitude for what had just happened, but also apprehensive that only half the job was done. 2 down, 2 to go. Picking up again the following afternoon, the next sibling to be told was sister number 1, the second eldest, who lives pretty close to me. Unlike the first two, she was not alone. My brother-in-law was with her, and again the nerves kicked in. And again I did pretty much the same story, and it was not getting any easier. And yet again, by my usual circuitous route, I arrived at those same words. I'm transgender. Nothing much more to add with this one because it was so friendly and accepting and caring. Only to note 2 things. I told them how I had come out to my youngest daughter, age 7 at the time, by telling her being a boy makes me feel sad and I don't want to feel sad anymore, so I'm going to stop being a boy and I'm going to be a girl. At which point my brother-in-law replied, "Well, when you put it like that, it's a no-brainer. You have to do this." My thoughts exactly. And then the reaction to the photos. I think my sister was quite apprehensive before she saw them, but she seemed very relieved. She nodded in the direction of her husband and said, "Oh, thank God, I thought you were going to look like him in a dirndl skirt." Like brother number 1, they had also wondered if I was gay. No, but yes. But had also wondered if I might be emigrating. No, still stuck with me. 3 down, 1 to go. Last but by no means least on the outing list was brother number 2, the middle of the 5 of us, up in Antrim later that afternoon. However, on the road up to Antrim, my phone pinged with a text message from sister number 1, which obviously I didn't read until I'd stopped driving. "So glad to have spoken to you and so glad that happiness is on the horizon. I loved you as Bob and will love you as Kirsty." When I arrived at brother number 2's house, he was there with my sister-in-law, as it seems that having your spouse in attendance is de rigueur for Northern Ireland-based siblings. Anyway, with the first 3 having gone so well, I was feeling positive, but at the same time, I just didn't know for sure until yet again, I reached the point of no return. I'm transgender. And as I had hoped, they were instantly supportive and empathetic. They were the only ones to ask if I'd been out in public as a woman yet. And I think they were quite surprised with my answer. Yes, countless times over several years, including 2 trips to England. The thought that I might be gay had also occurred to them in advance of my visit, but rather unexpectedly, they'd also wondered if I was coming to tell them that my ex and I were adopting an orphan. I'm just not that nice a person, unfortunately. We had a great conversation. I think because this was my final visit, I could finally relax a bit and just talk without the worries, which I suppose is why we come out, isn't it? As I was leaving, my sister-in-law gave me a hug and said, "I'll give you a hug now as my brother-in-law, and next time I see you, I'll give you a hug as my sister-in-law." Now, a quick epilogue to this story. Starting later that evening, I began to receive messages from nieces and nephews. "Mum told me your news. Seriously, I support you 100%. Gran and Granda, my late parents, would be so proud of you." I can't lie, it did come as a surprise, but the Mulholland girls are a strong bunch and you'll fit right in. Sister number 2 has competition for my favourite aunt now. This was particularly good because this person has 3 other aunts on the other side of the family who obviously don't get a look in the favourite aunt stakes. A few months later, but only a few weeks after I'd begun my transition for real, my family used my upcoming birthday as an excuse to throw a coming out party for me. at sister number one's house. My brothers and sisters were all there, and many of my nieces and nephews, and both my daughters. Pink balloons, my first ever birthday cards that said sister and aunt, and most special of all, one from my kids that said happy birthday, mum. And presents like I'd never received before in my life. Clothes, jewellery, perfume, makeup. And a couple of years after that, when I went over to England for my surgery, both my sisters insisted on coming over to be with me in hospital and flew back with me. And I moved in with sister number one for nearly 3 weeks after I got home, and she looked after me until I was well enough recovered to look after myself again. I really could not have gone through this transition so well without the support and love of my brothers and sisters. They really are amazing. And, earlier on, Karen talked about looking at everyone around you and then imagining that after transition, 95% of them would be gone. I looked around me before beginning my transition, and now that I'm out the other end, everyone's still there, but they've been joined by many more. I'm really lucky. Thanks.
Kirsty, what a brilliant story, as always. Um, yeah, fabulous. What a family you have. How,
Yeah,
how,
well,
how
my two
lucky is
sisters are actually on tonight, so I'm embarrassed talking about them in front of them.
that? Well, you kind of revealed your deepest, darkest secret to them, so I don't think this is going to, the story is not going to be a big deal. I have to say, the funniest line for me in that, and there were so many funny lines, was about adopting an orphan.
It
Wait,
was
what
unexpected.
put that in their heads?
Unexpected.
Bizarre, but fabulous as always. Thank you so much. Great to see you again. Um, I am going to. Oh, and Kirsty has actually. You will find Kirsty has told another story, which is on our YouTube channel, and you will also hear two amazing stories from her on our podcast 107 and podcast 158. So if you want to, and you can get that, as I said, at the website, or you can subscribe through the usual channels.